the thing to focus on for the rest of our time together this morning is this article by Rod Dreher, published in the American Conservative. Secret activists queering evangelical churches, ? Senior church leader warns of apparent plot to infiltrate conservative congregations and use legal force to affirm trans rights. Rod Dreher, he's like right on that line of respectable and crazy Christian conspiracy theorist. He walks that line really well. His hair indicates he's comfortable with the conspiracy a little bit. But this is something that's being more and more substantiated. This is something that, oh heck, what? I'm gonna look for. Do I have the video pulled up? There are two videos that have come out, and I don't know how many. John Harris is a part of it. They've been able to substantiate hostile takeovers in 3 Southern Baptist megachurches, or rather, well, I'm speaking inexactly. There has been a concerted effort to steer Christian institutions. Joe Rigney has talked about that in the educational sphere, and I interviewed him. But also churches themselves. You would think that they can't be steered. I played, I think it was on Monday or Tuesday, I played a little bit of this video. I watched the second installment yesterday about this church in North Carolina that J.D. Greer attempted a hostile takeover of, and he is highly suspect now for views that he's taken. Anyway, it's a part of a larger initiative that's coordinated and well supported monetarily. We're not going to get through the whole article, but I've got a link to the article. You can finish it on your own. Let's start it. Earlier today, I was interviewed by a Christian television show. The reporter asked me how the churches have received Live Not by Lies. That's a book he wrote that is really good. I highly recommend it. I read it a couple years ago. I told him we had sold over 150,000 copies in just over a year, and that I hear anecdotally about individuals and churches preparing, but that overall it seems that most American churches and American Christians prefer to console themselves with the idea that everything is going to be just fine if we just keep doing what we've been doing, only with more heart. This, I said, is dangerously naive. Man, if I could just make everybody read that part right there, that's just such a big part of what I'm about. There's, you know, the way that the world operates that I was just talking about, like it's not going well, so we just need to get everybody on board and make everybody do it harder. Well, that's the approach of the American church right now. Everything was going pretty well until about 150 years ago, and that's why I've been banging that drum of we just need to start doing what they were doing that we stopped doing. But there are a lot of people for whom it's just, we need to pray for the Holy Spirit more. We need to have more passionate worship. That'll solve things. You know, I disagree. Well, late this afternoon, I had an extraordinary telephone conversation with a friend who is a senior state leader in a nationally prominent evangelical denomination, one that skews conservative on LGBTQ issues. He just returned from a conference and said, I think you need to know what the next front in the culture war is. My friend told me that pastors in 5 different churches in the southern region of his state reported at the conference the same phenomenon. They have had strangers come and join their congregations, and 6 months or so later come out as transgender and demand their rights as official members of the congregation. It has happened to so many of these churches in the same period of time that they believe it is part of a concerted effort to undermine those churches. I don't have permission to give identifying details of the denomination and the particular state, but my friend told me that there is serious concern among the denomination's lawyers that these undercover trans activists have found a legal way to force these congregations to capitulate on trans issues or face ruinous lawsuits. Quote, there are a lot of churches in our denomination that don't have a lot of money, end quote. If they get sued, they won't have enough resources to even defend themselves, end quote. My friend said he just met with the pastors of this region who have all been poleaxed by this. I don't know that word. Poleaxed? Poleaxe. Yeah, that's another term for battle axe. So they've been poleaxed by this. Many of them are barely able to understand gender fluidity as a concept, much less figure out how to deal with it from a faithfully Christian point of view. They're sitting ducks, according to my friend. He said that on the advice of lawyers, the congregations are rewriting their bylaws to protect themselves from this kind of sneak attack. He went on to say that most of the people in his denomination believe that being a Christian is mostly about holding certain cultural beliefs, including politics, and being nice. Quote, they can't understand why people don't like them, and they think that if they're nice, they'll win people over. I've tried to explain why this isn't true, but most of our leaders in my denomination don't want to believe it. In 10 years, this church is going to look very, very different. This is not talking about the Global Methodist Church, although the Global Methodist Church is susceptible to this because we're made up of people who came out of the United Methodist Church, where we learned to value niceness and getting along above all things. A lot of people would say, well, we left, and so we're obviously willing to stop getting along. Look, even right now in the GMC, how many leading voices are unwilling to even talk about where we came from and what was wrong with it? It's because we do not know how to handle conflict well. We would much rather just sweep things under the rug, talk about nice, fun, motivating things, and then just trust that it's all going to work out. And what Dreher is saying is that's not how things have ever worked. We we want to imagine we have this. We're living in the era of American prosperity gospel, where we want to imagine that if we just pray enough and we love God enough and we worship enough, that He's going to keep us from any bad things happening. We believe that individually. We believe that about our churches, and that's just not the case. In fact, a lot of times, whenever He loves you, He ordains that you should suffer, that you should go through trials. This is something that Methodists really are terrible at understanding, because our version of God that we like doesn't require that anyone should ever suffer, which is just an odd position to take when you have the Bible as your foundational document. But we need to be very clear, like there have already been trials and we have failed those trials. That's what my Bitter Medicine series was about. And then we need to learn from the past to be equipped in the present. And that's, of course, where my anxiety is coming from today, is me trying to look soberly at the world and be prepared for the world. To what degree do I need to be prepared and equipped? To what degree do I just need to trust in God? What we've seen is generally Americans have been too lackadaisical in preparation. The book Live Not by Lies is a great account of what Christianity looked like in the Eastern Europe, Soviet bloc nations during the time of the USSR cracked down on the church, and the level of faithfulness required of true believers in that time. That doesn't just magically happen. Rather, we train ourselves, we prepare ourselves for times of trial so that when they come, we're not scandalized, we're not intimidated, but we can function and even thrive in such environments. It's not about being nice. My friend and I, this is back to the article, Dreher says, my friend and I talked further about how diabolical this strategy is by trans activists. It sounds crazy because it is crazy. If I did not know the man I was talking to, I would have trouble believing it. But look, this is not a rumor. Again, this man I talked to today spent the last few days talking face to face with the pastors who are dealing with this, trying to help them understand what's happening. My friend is pretty savvy about this kind of thing, but this left him shaken. Friends, one of the things that we need to understand is that the world is more complicated than it's ever been, and there are more moneyed and high-powered interests involved in the process of social engineering than has ever been. Social engineering has been a thing for a long time, and there's been more and more money from high-powered entities that have gotten in the mix. Just within the United Methodist Church, the one that I can always cite, thanks to Meg Basham, is the Arcus Foundation funded Reconciling Ministries Network to then do what it did in overturning the sexual morality of the denomination, and it was quite effective. At one point, the United Methodist Church was the largest Protestant denomination behind the Southern Baptist Convention in the United States. Now the SBC, if you followed their proceedings this last week, all measures aimed at transparency and ending the leftward drift of the SBC were effectively shut down. So a lot of people are going to be leaving the SBC. This is exactly what the world has wanted to do, is so demoralize Christians that we leave denominations and that we then leave our churches. Like, what happens when your church is sued into oblivion because it can't maintain its integrity ethically against the trans spread, which is what's happening here. There are all kinds of foundations and moneyed interests that are paying people, are empowering people, are taking people who are already unwell. This is what we're seeing in these protests. We're seeing a lot of people throw money at these people to go protest and behave violently and exacerbate the dysfunction going on. There are a lot of entities like this. And it's not just in America. This is what was exposed with all the USAID stuff. We've been exporting our social engineering abroad. We've been interfering in foreign cultures and advancing certain worldly agendas. And if the church, here's the fundamental thing, and I'm going to end on this and then look at comments and then pray. The church needs to know where we stand in relation to the world. We need to understand that the world has always been trying to compromise us, that it's working harder now than it ever has, and that your local church is a battleground for these things. You are not going as a civilian. You've been inducted into the Lord's army. He's calling you to take on the armor of God and do holy warfare. And if you insist on being a civilian and not doing holy warfare, then you're going to get bowled over, man. Your church is going to get caved in. The world is going to eat you for lunch. And there might be some people say, well, the world is always coming. We're called to do holy warfare against the world. We're here to be salt and light. We're here to advance the cause of Christ. Jesus said the gates of hell will not prevail against us. We're to advance the line of scrimmage against Satan. We have been inducted into this war. Now, we don't kill people of flesh and blood, but we are called to do warfare against the forces and powers of principality in the heavenly realms. And if we neglect to do that, if we refuse to do that, if we insist on just being innocent as doves at the expenses of being wise as serpents, then we are not being faithful with our trust. And so I really appreciate Dreher highlighting these things. I appreciate those of you who can tolerate listening to me. Man, not a lot of people listening right now. We've only got like 50 people right now. I'm not in this to make friends. I'm not in this to get a huge audience. I'm here to warn who will listen. And I don't want to get everybody anxious. I know I'm anxious today. God is sovereign. He's on his throne, but he has ordained a certain way of life for us. That's my concern here. I know that a lot of people coming out of the United Methodist Church, like me, were not prepared for this cultural moment. The United Methodist Church failed the test. We're establishing a new body, but it remains to be seen if we're going to equip our saints to withstand better than the saints in the UMC did. And that's a big question. A lot of you saw my interview with J.D. Hall. He left the SBC over this stuff. He watched the proceedings of this last week, and then he made kind of a smug post. Not actually, it was conciliatory on X, but he said, this is why there is no option but to leave denominations behind. Just find a church that hasn't been corrupted. When it gets corrupted, go and find another church. And man, if that's the position that we're in, I just think Satan is so pleased. We have to push back. We have to insist. And the key to building institutions that last and push back against the world is transparency. I talked all about that yesterday. If you didn't see yesterday's live stream, I would have you go and watch yesterday's live stream. We cannot do institutionalism the way that we have done. If you trust in the leadership, if you just trust it's all going to work out, it will get betrayed. Focus on transparency and accountability to a degree that we've never had before. And that is the standard that has to be met in the modern world to have maintained trust and to build something that withstands the forces of darkness. All right, I'm going to be done there. I'll look at some of the comments and then we'll pray.